I suppose the thing I've been thinking about is the sort of gamism or step on up sort of side of the experience, because I'm wanting to dredge up lots of old Forge sort of arguments and things. And bearing in mind,
but that was certainly the charge that some people leveled against 4E as bad, was that they tried to be all about the gamism, and that was awful.
Which is hilarious to those of us who actually remember playing earliest D&D, but that's
exactly.
neither here nor there.
Here nor there, exactly.
But so Ross, the take I have on that is, were we doing that in the sense of, was I throwing you challenges that you would have to think fully, that strategizing about overcoming the challenge was genuinely our social glue for our creativity?
Yes, I'm kind of feeling that maybe it wasn't.
Yeah, and at that level of what a creative agenda is supposed to be, it doesn't qualify, and it's a good example of, was strategic thinking important? Do I shift one square and cast now versus, even though all of our squares were in our heads, but we tried hard, right, to keep them there.
Yeah.
And did that kind of strategy, and I'm thinking of many, many, many instances, to me is a much more fine-grained part of the experience, which has very little to do with creative agenda and more to do with whatever muscles you're using, if that makes any sense. It's hard to distinguish that, but I always think of creative agenda as what we are validating the most among ourselves as why we're doing this. That's what it is. And I suppose I could have come up with that clarifying statement, let's count back 20 solid years ago, but I did come up with it 15 years ago. So, I mean, it can't be that bad to say it now. But the idea being that, yeah, there was a lot of strategic thinking in there, and of a kinds that I like. Particularly because it's the kinds that you have to be sort of fast on your feet. What just happened? And that's one reason why I kind of tried to to de-emphasize the how do I level up stress. Like if I don't level up right, I'm going to screw it all up. I'm going to blow it. My character is going to be ruined. They're going to die. If I don't choose exactly the right feat this time. And I think the game is actually pretty forgiving about that, because you get to retrain at every single level. I mean, if you don't like your feat, you say, oh, this one isn't like as good as I thought, take the next level, and retraining is free. You just say, oh, well, I'm going to switch it out for that feat, and it's not going to hurt you. Yeah, I thought I actually was surprised at how forgiving it was to let you wiggle your character as you went up. James, did?
Yeah, so one of the things that I was thinking about in preparation for the call was some of the things that are sort of unique to 4th edition, at least I never played 3rd, but I played every other edition of the game. And the one thing that I would say from a player's side that 4E, from my point of view, suffers from, is that there is so much choice at every single level.
It is really huge, yeah.
There are, I think, in the course of a character's career, if they go up to 30 levels, there are 15 feats to pick out of probably a list of maybe 300, something like
easily,
that. Easily,
yeah.
And at each particular level, just within the core player books, there are probably, 4 or 5 different powers at every different level. And then you factored in also the primal book and then also the psionic book. So that's probably closer to like maybe 7 or 8 per level.
And hybrid classes.
Yeah, exactly. And so if you've ever played chess with somebody who doesn't quite know what they're doing, and like they've got their hand on the piece, and the other person is saying, well, is that your move? Is that your move? And like, no, I haven't taken my hand off the piece yet. The problem with 4th edition is that there's a little bit of that leveling up, but the fact that you can retrain means that you're never done.
All right. So you're saying it actually just makes it worse. You got to go backwards too.
Good choice 5 levels ago may not be a good choice now, and so you're never really done like making a decision. It's always a provisional. I think this is good enough, but let me rethink it later on. And what I basically decided is no, fuck with that. I'm not retraining it at all. Like I'm making a choice. I'm sticking with it. Maybe it's good or it's bad, but I don't have time to come up with a spreadsheet to figure out all this stuff. So the fact that it's forgiving, that's a good thing in terms of people who are worried about getting it right. But it's also a bad thing if you're worried about like, am I like maximizing this, right? If I really am stepping on, how much should I really think about this and really work into it? So.
It's a good question because the more is better philosophy just hit 4E like a ton of bricks. Mm. Even in the base book. I mean, even if you have just the player's handbook and just personally, I think the second DM guide is pretty much essential. So let's include that. So first handbook and the player's guide. First handbook and then the 2 DM guides. If you were doing that, and even just grab we'll leave the monster manuals out because I at least think that that's one of the easiest portions of the whole game is monsters and their stat blocks, which is just I found incredibly doable. But so leaving that out, but if those are the options, and if you're going to play with everything like warlords and all, right, the whole all those things, you really are still looking at quite a lot of page flipping. You got to look at your general feats. You got to look at your class feats and your race feats, and that's just feats. And really, if you think about it, feats are a hell of a lot of effort for not much in play.
Yeah, exactly.
They really are. It's like +1 out of this. Some of them are huge, like the ones that give you big initiative pluses. There are a couple which are okay, that's for me. But not many. And I always thought that they were way too much. That's one aspect of the design. There are way too much effort in those feats for picking and processing and applying in play. Way too much effort for what they actually bring.
I don't. But when I was looking at feats, what I wanted was something where I didn't have to think about whether or not it applied or not.
Right.
And then something that simply provided a static bonus. Pretty much one thing.
You should be able to just mark it on your sheet. That number goes up, and you never have to think about it again. There's no if.
Exactly.
When I do this, I agree. And that kind of stuff can be left for powers, which can be weird and contingent and stuff. I think people got seduced by. The designing team or whatever kind of got seduced by and.
Or that's an easy way to pad out your page count for a new release.
Right. I someday am going to have to get a better understanding of this. There was a lot of talk about how you would be playing primarily with cards. That your character sheet would be in a lot of ways, a bunch of cards.
A deck of powers.
Yeah. And that led people to, I think they were trying to tap into the customizable card game aesthetic. And I found that when you made cards, when I played face-to-face, when you made cards and had people put them in front of themselves, it was very useful because then if you used something that was like a daily, you could flip it over. Mm-hmm. That kind of stuff was actually kind of useful. But I think that led to the idea of, we better have 1,000 of these so that everybody will have a different, little profile deck and so on.
Well, the other thing I remember about the launch of 4E and the evolution of it was the idea that there would be some very extensive computer tools that you could use for building your characters.
Yeah, they're very big on you being a member. That was huge.
And they just didn't get the technology to where it would need to be to make something workable with the game and with the options and how quickly everything came out. Because a lot of that decision paralysis and things you were talking about, James, I can imagine a software way of doing that makes it a lot easier because It tells
Right.
you what will happen if you take these things, and you can evaluate it quickly, and you can see what happens. And D&D for forever, as far as I'm concerned, has just never been able to get on the computer bandwagon. Everybody has always been able to do something better with a computer and role playing than D&D, whether it was TSR or whoever could ever do. So whether it's a curse or wherever it came from, I think that's a failure that they had.
What was that, James?
Were they originally intending to do that in house? Because I think that was the case, and I just remember thinking in whatever year that was, you guys are crazy. There's no way you can do that in house,
right?
And the money you have to pay a vendor to do that right would I would think that'd be extremely expensive to do. I don't know, but
no, I think you're right. I think there was a lot of back and forth on what was going to be online and what was going to be in the book, and if I'm remembering correctly, and I'm really worried about whether I am or not, but if I am, there were a lot of quick decisions just before publication about what it was actually going to look like as a book, and whether it was going to be even more of a platform rather than a book.
Right.
And, I don't know. I mean, we're talking about all sorts of things. We're talking about Hasbro decision-making. Wizards of the Coast is really just now a plaque on a door, if that.
Yeah.
So, and who knows what. Well, anyway, to get back to our game, one thing that I wanted to ask about was, what do we think was added or not added, or am I barking up the wrong tree, by even calling this Dungeons & Dragons at all? Because my romantic view of the game, in my head, 4E is not Dungeons & Dragons. I would call it, or if it were, I would have given it a different sobriquet. Did I ever tell you this? That instead of calling it 4th edition, they should have given it a special name and have it be more like a detour than an upgrade. And the special name would have been RAW, R-A-W, rules as written. Right? Okay. And RAW, here you go. Crunch. Yeah. And so I even take off the D&D part of that in my head. We're just playing Fantasy Raw. And
it's interesting. Yeah. The take that I had thinking about this call and going to it was thinking about, where did the color come from? Where did the kind of foundational color of our game and maybe what's in 4E? It's very different than whatever foundational color you might get from 3E, 3.5, Pathfinder, and all the rest of it. And then you had your own special take of a sub-slice plus then add, your own...
I didn't add much
chunk of color.
I have to say, I think that when I specified the rules that we would be using as a subset, and I shouldn't even say the rules, all resolution. We didn't take anything out. We didn't add anything. But for the classes and the races, and what I thought of as the emergent setting concept, just by looking at those, we hewed pretty close to what they had. We wiggled the Minotaurs just a little bit, but I don't think very much. And we went with, like I said, it was a subset, yes, and a very carefully chosen subset, but I don't think that we really did much more alteration to it once we had it. So I completely agree with you that color-wise, you have to go way back to find people playing something designated Dungeons & Dragons that looked like what we were doing. You have to go way back.
Agreed.
But 4E has it in there to find. That's one thing I really find attractive about it.
Yeah, and I think one of the I'll take that, that it was really mostly just in there to find. But what's interesting to me is that by getting rid of some of the other stuff, it made it easier to find. Oh
yeah, that's what I mean. You have to. You have to. Looking at those books, even without the supplements. But if you look at all the players' handbooks, for God's sake, I would never play it except by doing this crisscross, precisely chosen class and race thing, ever.
Yeah.
So
too much do not work and play well with each other if you include everything.
more to it, but I wanted to make sure we didn't leave Ross out. Ross, what did you think?
I was going to say, I think it's kind of funny that you've kind of got some of this content that's clearly been generated because they had this gap in their matrix to fill in, but it's actually quite it's more interesting, the sort of weird psionic classes that they've gone and said, well, we need to have a defender and a leader and a...
Right, you can have your meta classes and they're all still there. Yeah. So it's not like you're losing anything at that level.
But they're kind of more interesting than the sort of the stuff, the colour they then drop on the fighter in those.
Yeah, they...
Not the original classes of rubbish.
No, actually, I remember they actually put some work into making the fighter interesting with the stances and stuff like that. But one thing I noticed that I don't know, I played 4E, at a game store and stuff with people too, and I wasn't the DM, and I noted that they just couldn't get away from the idea that if you had, say, a warlord or a bard, you could do without a cleric. You'd have to play a little differently to make use of the benefits involved. Just like we had to play a little differently with an Argent than we would with a cleric. But the basics that they provide, that kind of support, is there. And yet, sitting at the table, everybody seemed to think that you needed your core of your fighter, your wizard, and your cleric, and then those other things could be slotted on as the weirdos. You couldn't just play with a bard. And, why not? Right. They do what, the cleric does if you use it. So in many ways, I feel as though that's what I mean by the D&D-ness of it. If you play 4E and you think about it too much as Dungeons & Dragons, you're actually going to hamper what the game has to offer.
I think that I want to qualify that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking a few moments ago about the OSR, right? And one of the things that I gather from some people who were there and some people who developed like this play style in mimicry of some of what was there, I think that what we were doing in terms of content and in terms of the setting that we were doing is very, very much consistent with the fantasy stuff that was being done in this particular game, say 1974 through 1979, right? That it's the same genre of music, if you want to say.
Right, I remember you talking about this, actually, yeah. Uh-huh.
Right. And that 4th edition is a completely different instrument than back in 0E, right?
I completely agree about that.
It's this using this enormous, what I was thinking about is enormous Renaissance cathedral pipe organ to play Louie Louie,
right?
Which is both demented and awesome at the same time. It means that you got to do it, but it's very different than the 0E approach of we got a washboard, we got an electric guitar, we got a set of spoons, and we got a violin. Let's try to do something.
And we have Bob, and we have to do something with Bob. So
exactly. And so when those guys back in 2008 were saying, "Look, what the hell is this Renaissance pipe organ? It's completely different than our washboard zither, musical saw band that we put together." They're absolutely right. Those are two completely different instruments, and probably lend themselves to different types of experiences. But clearly, you can do Louie Louie with an enormous pipe organ, and it's worth doing. And so to me, that essence of trying to play this style of music with whatever you've got on hand, to me, that's what Dungeons & Dragons, quote unquote, is all about.
Right.
Whether or not it's consistent with the way it's been marketed from, let's say, 1985 through 2015, I don't know. Maybe it isn't. Mm-hmm. But I think that to me, we did get a Dungeons & Dragons experience in a very authentic sort of way, right? The way it would have been done back in the day.